him a lot, 'cause we got him on the spot. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back.
Hello and welcome back to On the Spot. This is Paula Schaffner with episode 16 of Welcome Back, Kotter. Follow the Leader, Part 1. The IMDb summary is pretty long. Sweathogs tapping at the window for breakfast, coupled with the love, attention, and time Mr. Kotter lavishes upon his students, finally drive the neglected Julie to leave Gabe. Meanwhile, Kotter's classroom lesson on democracy goes awry when the Sweathogs vote Barbarino out and Freddie in as their new leader, provoking the rejected Vinny to drop out of school. Pretty dramatic. This episode first aired on January 20th, 1976. Part 2 would air on the 22nd, and I'll talk about that schedule change later. This episode was directed by Bob Lehendro as usual, and it was another written by the husband-wife team of Jewel Jaffe Rano and Jerry Rano, so that's interesting because it definitely is an episode that talks about marriage and relationships. In the cold opening, the Kotters are in casual weekend wear, drinking coffee and eating, I think, chocolate cake with white frosting. He tells her about his uncle Sylvester, who was a real nut. Sylvester told a psychiatrist that he thought he was a dog, and he had this feeling ever since he was a puppy. Then, in the first main scene, we don't start out in the classroom. We are still in the Kotter's apartment in the morning. We begin with a freeze frame on them in bed. The blinds are drawn, but if you know what's coming up, you can see a silhouette at the stage right window. Someone taps at that window. There's applause as Gabe sits and tries to wake up. He sleepily touches Julie's shoulder and tells her to answer the door. She gets up in a long orange nightgown and puts an orange robe over it. Instead of going to the door, she knows to roll up the blinds, and we'll find out why she knows that. Arnold is in his usual outfit and he grins and waves. She opens the window and he chants a "Good morning to you" song. Then he does his laugh. She slams down the window. He opens the window, yes, from the outside, and sings "And many more." She tells him to wait a minute. Then she closes and locks the window. So obviously it was unlocked before. She puts her hands on her hips and tells Gabe, who's lying down again by now, that it's Arnold Horshack again. He's here for breakfast, the third time this week. So that's why she's not surprised. He's at the window. And this must be at least Wednesday, although we'll find out later that it's probably not Friday. Gabe sleepily sits up again and says he looks at it this way. Seeing Arnold Horshack at breakfast lessens the shock of seeing him at school. Gabe smiles. He reaches out for her and she sits on the edge of the bed. Arnold watches from the window, his chin resting on his fist. So obviously he is curious about this, but he can't hear anything. She says this is ridiculous. These kids are in and out of this apartment day and night. He says it never bothered her before. Why this sudden change of heart? And we saw starting in the pilot that Julie was very welcoming to the Sweathogs, even at times when Gabe was not. And so this is a shift in her attitude, and we'll find out as things go on whether this is a permanent split or just temporary unhappiness. She says they don't have any private life anymore. She really thinks they should talk about it. He says he's all ears, and he segues into a Groucho impression about lending an ear instead of, as you might expect, Shakespearean actor routine. He, of course, defaults to Groucho. She stands up again and says to be serious. Wherever they are, there's a little Sweathog between them. Arnold waves. Gabe says that's not true. There was no Sweathog between them last night. He grins. There's laughter and applause as she walks away, so it's implying the Sweathogs didn't come over last night, and so Gabe and Julie were able to have sex. Gabe leaps out of the bed and goes to her. He's in a blue-gray undershirt and gray pajamas with darker gray stripes. He puts his hands on her elbows, but her arms are still crossed. He says the Sweathogs are his work, and his work is important to him. Now, we do know that Gabe teaches other classes, but obviously he puts the Sweathogs at the center of his work. He says he thought she was happy. He's happy. She says, of course he's happy. He's leading a terrific life. So this is a contrast to the reunion episode and some others where Gabe had doubts about teaching. She says she's leading his life instead of her own, but she can't really do that because his life's leader is him, and that makes her nothing. She goes over to the kitchen area. He tells her if she wants to be nothing, be a quiet nothing. Not very sympathetic. He says Arnold Horshack is his student, and Arnold can have breakfast in Gabe's house if Gabe wants him to. In the past, Gabe was putting restrictions on the Sweathogs coming over, but now, even though this is beyond what any teacher then or now would allow, he is supporting Arnold dropping in because he's in this argument with Julie. Gabe lets Arnold in out the cold. And I have to point out that Gabe, again, doesn't seem to be affected by the cold. He's not dressed that warmly. Arnold's face is so frozen, he can't feel it. Gabe feels Arnold's face and says he has bad news for Arnold. Arnold's face is still there. There's brief applause at yet another time that they are making fun of Arnold's looks. Gabe shuts the window and then puts his hand on Arnold's shoulder as Arnold rubs his own face. Gabe wants Arnold to enjoy this breakfast, which may be his last, implying that Arnold is going to die, but this is the last time that Arnold can get breakfast here at the Kotters. Arnold skips around and denies that he's here for breakfast. And I just want to mention later we will see other characters skipping, and it's meant to be humorous. Here it is an aspect of Arnold, and again gives the impression that Arnold might be gay, although I don't think that's intentional. I think it's supposed to be that he's childish or childlike. He says he's just here to say hello. He laughs, but then he seriously asks Mrs. Kotter if she's going to insist that he have breakfast. So he's trying to be polite. Obviously he wants breakfast again. She puts her hands on his shoulders and wants him to listen closely. She is never ever going to say this again. What would he like for breakfast? He says he's not a picky eater. He just wants 2 eggs and 2 all-beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, onions on a sesame seed bun, which is from a mid-1970s series of McDonald's commercials. And I still remember that catchphrase perfectly. As Gabe puts on and fastens a blue robe, he sings, "Hold the pickles, hold the lettuce, special orders don't upset us, all you have to do is let her make it," which is from a Burger King commercial from that era, which I don't remember as well. Arnold grooves along a bit, but Julie pours a cereal box over Gabe's head. And this is disgusting. As the scene fades, Arnold picks some of the cereal out of Gabe's hair and eats it. So I don't know if it's just he doesn't have boundaries, he's not easily grossed out, or he's just really hungry. The next scene is in the classroom, and I think it's the afternoon of that day. It definitely feels more like class than homeroom. The extras this time are Catboy, who's not wearing a cap, and we'll find out in the next episode that he's named Ricky. And he was one of a set of male extras that we got names for when Gabe was introducing them to Bambi, and Ricky was one of the names, so I'm going to assume that they're consistent about that, but I still don't know the names of the other male extras. There's the not Gutenberg guy, and there's Joyce, the usual black female extra, and there's the boy redhead, and this time we have 2 of the many brunette white girls, and one has sort of a short and sassy Dorothy Hamill bob. Look that up if you need to. And the other, we don't really get to see much of her face, and she is sitting kind of on the edge of the classroom, and she's got longer brown hair. Mr. Kotter is writing on the board, and he's wearing shades of brown. Today, he wants to talk about something that's not in their lesson plan, leadership, and that's the word that he just wrote on the board. I don't know why he's going off their lesson plan. I mean, it does seem to fit social studies, but I guess it's on his mind. And he asks how we pick our leaders. Arnold says, "In this great land of ours, we pick our leaders through the democratic process. They are elected." Freddie points out that President Ford wasn't elected, and that's because at the time that Richard Nixon was elected and then re-elected, his vice president was Spiro Agnew. And by this point, of course, we're in early 76, and Nixon had resigned about a year and a half earlier. One says that's a special case. Ford was the only one in Washington at the time who wasn't under arrest, which is kind of a daring joke for a sitcom aimed at kids, mostly. There will be references to Nixon later, and I assume Ford. One grins. The Hamill girl and the redhead are amused. Freddie looks like one has a point. There's quick applause. Kotter says they have a leader in this class, Vinnie Barbarino, and that had been established in the pilot that Vinnie is the leader of the Sweathogs, and they've been pretty consistent about that, although there have been times when people have disagreed with or not obeyed Vinnie. He writes VB on the board for Vinnie Barbarino. Then there's a loyal opposition, Vinnie Barbarino, so he writes VB again. Arnold playfully punches Vinnie as a show of support. Ricky, Vernagine, and the not Gutenberg boy, who I will refer to as NG from this point out, smile, and NG gives a thumbs up. They all approve of Vinnie as leader, or at least at the moment. Vinnie also smiles and says he likes that, meaning he likes that he doesn't really have any opposition. It's sort of like the image of Soviet Russia and modern Russia, where you didn't really have free elections, although they don't make that point. Freddie says, "You the leader of the Sweathogs, right?" leading Vinny to ask if a bear is Catholic and if the Pope lives in the woods, so reversing those two cliches and substituting the word lives for something more scatological. Behind him, NG looks over at Vernogine, shakes his head, taps his head to indicate Vinny is not all there mentally, and shakes his head again. So really stands out as an extra going that extra mile. Freddie asks who made Vinny leader. Kotter says if it was Democratic, they'd vote on it. So we don't really know the whole story of when Vinny became leader of the Sweathogs. Maybe it was when they first started high school, and it's been a couple years now. Maybe it's been going on since junior high or even elementary school. Or maybe Vinny just said he was the leader and nobody argued with him until today. Everyone thinks this is a great idea to vote on it, except Vinny. One tells Vinny he's a shoo-in, which is interesting in light of what's going to happen. Vinny says nobody challenges Vinny Barbarino, and again, the thing of Vinny loves to say his full name. Kotter asks why not, and everyone leans towards Vinny. A bit of a rebellion here. Vinny says they're here to learn and they should open up their books, which obviously is not typical for Vinny. He's trying to discourage an election. Kotter asks if anybody would like to challenge King Barbarino, and there's a pause as nobody wants to step forward, and then the studio audience sounds impressed when Freddie stands. He smiles and does his "hi there" catchphrase. He takes the challenge. Off screen we can hear Vernogine's approval. We don't have a lot of Freddie and Vernogine interacting with each other in this episode, but if they are not still a couple, they're still connected. Kotter says it's time for the runoff. Vinny asks what that is, so Juan says that's when you say, "Ma, I'll be back in a couple of days," and then you run off. And that's ironic considering what happened when he left home and his parents barely noticed, and one of our Sweathogs is missing. The class is amused by Juan's definition. Kotter says it'll be the Democratic way with a show of hands, so everyone holds their hands towards Mr. Kotter. He says, "One of these days," but it's not exactly a Jackie Gleason honeymooners impression. For Vinny, I count the votes of course, Vinny, Arnold, which is interesting because Arnold was pretty much controlled by Vinny in the pilot, and he has started to show a little more independence, but he still defaults to supporting Vinny as the leader. Joyce, I thought that was interesting because she is the other African-American student in the class besides Freddie and Vernogine, and in one episode she actually goes on a date with Freddie, but maybe they're not close friends, or maybe she just thinks Vinny's the best leader. Ricky votes for Vinny, and the brunette girl in the front row, whose face we still haven't seen at that point. NG is pointing like he's counting. Kotter puts the number 5 under VB, because he now has FW for the opponent. Freddie, of course, votes for himself, and Vernogine does it enthusiastically, although Ricky puts his hand on her arm like he's trying to stop her. So interesting stuff going on in the margins here. Freddie also gets the votes of the redhead and the Hamill brunette, who both sit near him in the classroom. I assume that NG votes for Freddie too, but we can't see him in this shot. Kotter writes the number 5 under FW too, and then he realizes it's a tie. Now, in some episodes we have about 12 or 14 students. Here we very specifically have 11. Kotter says somebody didn't vote. He realizes it's Epstein, who's grinning. The redhead looks very interested in this, but the Hamill girl looks bored. Juan looks over at Vinny, but he points to and says Washington's name. Vinny is stunned. Everyone, even the people who voted for Vinny, stand and are happy for Freddie. Vinny stands too, and he pulls Juan away from the crowd surrounding Freddie. He thought Juan was his friend, and he says Juan can't do this. That's interesting. In the episode where Vinny ran for student body president and lost, he presumably got all the votes of the Sweathogs, but he wasn't running against another Sweathog. In that episode, he said that he wouldn't vote for Juan if Juan ran for class president, even though Juan is his best friend. So it's interesting that he feels most betrayed by Juan. But of course, Arnold voted for Vinny. Vinny voted for himself. He understands that Freddie would vote for himself. Juan says that Vinny has been the leader a long time, doesn't say how long, and it's time they got some new blood, and he emphasizes blood. Freddie reaches over and slaps Juan's extended hand. Then in a politician voice, he takes Vinny's hand and introduces himself as Frederick Boom Boom, and then as himself he says, "New blood." He laughs triumphantly. Vinny pushes past everybody to go to Kotter, who's just erased the board. He wants Kotter to do something. Kotter says he's happy for Freddie, sorry for Vinny. Vinny wants Kotter to say that Vinny as leader again, but Kotter can't do that. Vinny either doesn't respect democracy or he just didn't feel like this is something that should be put to a vote. It's clear that he can't accept defeat, so he suggests that they all go to Coney Island, which has been mentioned on a few episodes before, and try a new ride where a little guy with no neck throws you around until you can't stand it no more. Arnold asks Freddie what he wants to do today. Freddie puts his long arms around on one side, the longer-haired brunette girl in one, and on the other side, Verna Jean and Arnold. He thinks they should all go down to Times Square and watch the pigeons drop their regards on Broadway. Everyone inexplicably loves this idea about bird poop. And yes, it sounds better than being thrown around on Coney Island, but just odd that that's the best he can come up with, and we'll see more of his plans in part 2, of course. Arnold says, "Right you are, Freddie," like he does with "Right you are, Mr. Kotter," and somehow he again gets his hand hurt with the hand slap. So the earlier episodes, Arnold just kept missing the hand slaps, and now he is getting his hand slapped, but it hurts. Freddie tells Vincent it's rather like that old saying, "The king, he dead. Long live the king." The class is delighted by this, and one slaps hands with Freddie. Vinny says, "Hey, I'm Vinny Barbarino." Freddie snaps his fingers, and the whole class says, "Vinny who?" And I don't know if that's a reference to Jimmy Who, which was a thing when Jimmy Carter ran for president in 76 and of course started campaigning in 75. He didn't have national name recognition, and so what eventually became an ironic question, Jimmy Who. So I don't know if that is referencing that or if it is just that Freddie has managed to make the whole class negate Vinny's existence. Vinny looks hurt, betrayed, and confused. He starts to leave, but Arnold and then Freddie and Juan run after him, Freddie saying they're jiving. Vinny laughs in relief and slaps hands with his friends. But when he says he's still leader, everyone firmly says no. He calls them punks. Again, the thing of a punk is somebody who's no good rather than a punk rocker. He starts to leave again. Kotter grabs the sleeve of Vinny's leather jacket and asks where he's going. Vinny says he ain't staying here. He tells them to try to do without him. He's dropping out of school, and he tells them up all their noses with rubber hoses, so a group use of that catchphrase. Kotter calls after him as there's a snippet of the theme and applause. Kotter comes back looking frustrated. In the next scene, Gabe is now in shades of gray, writing at his desk in an empty classroom. They don't say, but it seems to be the next morning. The passage of time in both of these parts is unclear. Julie comes in with maybe the same picnic basket as she brought in the sit-in episode. Gabe is surprised to see her. She starts taking out food. He becomes old Tex and says she brought him some victuals. He suggests later they go out behind the barn. She smiles. He stands and they embrace. She says that'd be nice considering that when old Tex left this morning, he didn't even wake her up to kiss her goodbye. We don't know why. Maybe he was in a rush. Maybe things were too tense and he didn't want to deal with it. Still is old Tex. He says he's sorry and he plumb forgot. He didn't even kiss his horse goodbye. As himself, he says he's been worried about Barbarino. She turns away in annoyance. She asks if they can ever talk about anything besides his job, which is an odd question considering that they're in his classroom, but she'll clarify this later. He thinks she doesn't understand that Barbarino quit school. She says she understands. He asks what she wants to talk about. Art, politics, Donny Osmond's love life, and of course Donny Osmond was a very clean-cut 70s teen idol. I don't know if this counts as another ABC reference, but the Donny and Marie variety show started on January 23rd, so later that week. Obviously, people knew who Donny Osmond was at that time, but this puts him a little more on their radar, I think, particularly because both shows had a preteen and young teen audience. And I watched both shows. Juan enters saying, "Hey, shalom, amigo," which he has said before, but it's not quite a catchphrase, followed by Freddie. Juan says they've got to talk business, and Freddie says as the new leader of the Sweathogs, he's made a list of ways to improve their image. The first is to start a rumor that they're all smart. Julie looks very annoyed, and she sits at his student's desk. Kotter says he's busy, but Juan says he doesn't look busy, so Juan is not the most supportive when Gabe and Julie have marital difficulties, or he thinks that they do, like on the episode where she went away for the weekend. When Kotter insists that he's busy, Juan says they can skip out. So he and Freddie literally skip out of the room arm in arm, and there's brief applause because this is not in character for them, unlike Arnold. Julie shakes her head and then points after them. She says they're not students, they're inmates, and Gabe is the head cuckoo. I don't know if that's a reference to the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which came out in November 1975, but again, a joke about what would have been called an insane asylum at the time. time. She asks, isn't there anybody in this entire place that's sane? So right on cue, Woodman enters with a small palm tree in a pot, which he brought from the men's room. It seems that Freddie Washington wants to give it that beach look. So I wondered if maybe this was subconsciously Bambi's influence, although she's not in this episode. Mr. Woodman asks Kotter what he's been teaching his people. Kotter says he's been teaching them leadership. Woodman says he used to teach leadership, and it's not palm trees. Leadership is knowing that behind every door there's somebody waiting to get you. Again, Mr. Woodman being paranoid. And he exits after only 30 seconds, but it's a nice little glimpse of him. Gabe tells Julie that Mr. Woodman is the only man that Will Rogers ever punched in the mouth, and that's a thing about Will Rogers said he never met a man he didn't like. It's basically a 1930s reference. Will Rogers was still known in the 70s, so people would have got the joke. Gabe takes out a little notebook to make an appointment with Julie. She gets up, grabs the notebook, and throws it to the floor. She starts packing up the picnic basket. When he says it was a joke, she says it's not funny. So he starts telling a joke about a very old wrinkled turtle that marries a woman. Julie interrupts to say that absolutely everything is a joke to him. They can never just talk, so we don't get the punchline to this turtle joke. Arnold, without his hat, enters and finds the food she left on the desk. He says, "Oh joy, oh rapture," which might be a reference to the song from the Gilbert and Sullivan musical HMS Pinafore. Julie says, "Oh shoot," which is probably cleaned up from what she's thinking, and plays on the "Oh joy, no rapture." She leaves, shutting the door behind her. The bell rings as Arnold sits at Cotter's desk and starts eating. He asks what's the matter. The students file in as Arnold says Kotter looks distracted. He yells, "Yoo-hoo, Mr. Kotter!" Kotter asks if Arnold said something, but Arnold guesses not. Kotter gestures for Arnold to sit in his own chair. Kotter's about to close the door again, but someone quietly says he wants to talk to Kotter. In the hallway, Kotter peers around, and then Vinny dashes out, dressed as a priest, including a hat. There's applause, laughter, and squeals. He says, "It's me, Vinny Barbarino." Kaplan looks like he's breaking character. Then Kotter sarcastically says, "No!" Vinny says he's wearing this disguise. He takes off the hat to reveal a bald skin cap. There's more laughter and applause, and Kaplan definitely breaks. Vinny says he borrowed the disguise from his uncle, the priest, which raises a lot of questions. One, why is he pretending to be bald? I assume that that's not from his uncle. Does he think that makes it more convincing? And it's just his scalp. I mean, you could still see the long Travolta hair. Also, did the uncle give him permission to wear his priestly garment? Is there another reference to this uncle later? I think there is an episode where Vinny actually considers joining the priesthood. I've mentioned that once or twice before. It might be at the end of the season, but we'll find out eventually. I'm pretty sure we'll see Vinny in clerical garb again. Vinny told his folks he dropped out of school. Vinny's father said, "See, Margie, I told you we shouldn't have had him." I don't know if that's an abortion joke, which is particularly surprising because they're Catholic. This is consistent with Vinny's mother being named Margie. Vinny says, "Then bing bang bong, they kicked him out." He sits on the bench. Kotter comes over and puts his hand on Vinny's shoulders. He's really sorry. He sits next to him and puts one hand on Vinny's knee and the other on his back. And this is another episode where Kotter is very touchy-feely with his students in a non-creepy way. He wants Vinny to come back to school. Obviously, Vinny is in school, but come back as a student. And Kotter will talk to Vinny's father, and he's sure that Vinny's dad will take Vinny back. Vinny says he couldn't face the guys without being the leader. And this is similar yet different to when Juan ran away, and it was because he felt like his friends wouldn't accept him if he wasn't the toughest. We'll later have an episode where Arnold disappears, but I don't remember if Freddie ever does. But it's interesting that both Juan and Vinny feel that they have a particular role to play in their friend group and in the class. Who are they when they aren't that? Early in the season, we were introduced to them and they were kind of stock characters. Now we're pushing against that in a different way than the thing of Julie being the adoring, supportive wife is being tested here. Vinny says he doesn't feel it's Cotter's fault, even though he thinks most of it is. Vinny needs a place to stay. Kotter says he can't have Vinny come over. He's not running a home for wayward priests. And that's sort of a 50s phrasing, like a home for wayward girls. Gabe stands again. As Kotter continues to quietly refuse, Vinny says Mr. Kotter was his teacher, his friend, and the last one on the list. So we don't know who else he tried, considering he probably wouldn't want to move into any of his friends' houses because he's mad at them. Maybe Bonzo Moretti, who knows. Arnold comes out of the classroom, so Vinny looks down and hides his head behind his hat. Arnold asks if Mr. Kotter forgot about starting class, class, and then he recognizes Vinny because he knows that Vinny is Catholic. Not a very effective disguise. Vinny says he should have known that, but he got stupid since he's no longer the leader. That's sort of lampshading the thing of Vinny is probably the dumbest Sweathog. Arnold kneels and pats Vinny's shoulder. He says he'll still be Vinny's friend, even though Vinny's not leader no more. Kotter corrects his grammar for once. Usually he lets these go. Arnold doesn't care that Vinny is a high school dropout who will never make more than $2.50 an hour, and that will be ironic in season 4. Arnold says, always remember, life is a cabaret, old chum. Come to the cabaret, and that's of course a reference to the 1972 movie. Arnold smiles cheesily before re-entering the classroom, and there's applause. And again, if they don't want us to think Arnold's gay, why is Arnold so gay? And I mean that in the nicest way. Vinny takes off his Lennon specs, and I don't know if he borrowed those from his uncle or if he got them at the same place he got the bald cap. He puts the glasses in his hat. He can't believe that Arnold Horshack put him down. That was the thing that Arnold used to not insult Vinny, although we have seen him do that in more recent episodes. Kotter asks why there was no up your nose with a rubber hose. Vinny says he tried, but he couldn't do it. He bursts into tears. It was like the rubber hose was stuck in his throat. Pretty awful image. We see that besides being the leader, Vinny is supposed to be the best at ranking and insulting in a stylized way, and he can't do that anymore, and so that adds to his identity crisis. Kotter is sitting next to Vinny again, and he again puts his hands on Vinny's arm and shoulder. He reluctantly says Vinny can stay with us, meaning him and his wife, just for the night. Vinny suggests a week. They go back and forth, with Kotter saying 2 days, and Vinny saying 5 days, and compromising on 3 days, and Vinny gets lunch. They shake hands on the deal. Vinny is so happy that he clicks his heels as he exits. And I think we had an episode where Arnold was clicking his heels. Kotter is amused by this until it sinks in that he has asked Vinny to stay with them at a time when Julie is mad that they don't have a private life. There's applause as we fade to the next scene. Julie is resting on the couch. We know she's not sleeping because her fingers are fidgeting and she's wearing her glasses and watch. She's in the same outfit as before, minus the floral jacket that she had in the classroom, and she's even still got her maroon boots on, even though she's on the sofa. When she hears Gabe come home, she sits up suddenly and pretends to be reading a magazine. He's got red flowers, maybe carnations, definitely not roses, and a box of what looks like Valentine candy in a heart-shaped box. He loudly sings Femina and some nonsense Italian like he's in an opera. She furiously flicks through the magazine. He sits beside her and says his Italian isn't that great, but she was right, they don't have enough private life. He calls her baby and kisses the side of her head as he promises from now on they will have a private life. He gives her the flowers and candy. She melts a little and smiles. He puts his arm around her and snuggles up to her. She says, "Thank you, honey," and they kiss. As she rests her head on his shoulder, he tells her that they'll be able to start their truly terrific stay-at-home private life as soon as Vinny leaves. She looks up at him in annoyance. She says, "Vinny who?" And it's not a matter of her negating Vinny's existence like his classmates were doing, but more she really hopes it's not who she thinks it is. Kotter says, "Barbarino, tall guy, dimple," and he points at his own chin to indicate the dimple that Travolta had. Julie angrily says, "Vinny Barbarino is coming here?" Gabe explains, claiming that it's only for a couple days, although they had compromised on 3, as Julie wordlessly gets a suitcase from the closet. He tells her she's overreacting and she won't even notice that Vinny is here. He tells her not to leave, so she grabs his green jacket and throws it at him, telling him he can leave. He throws the jacket back at her and says he lives here. She says, "Not anymore," and throws the jacket out the window. He says that was his favorite jacket, and we have seen that green jacket in quite a few of the episodes. He's not going to rant or rave or carry on like a maniac. He's going to remain calm, so of course he yells incoherently. Then he calmly explains how he feels like it's partially his fault that Vinny quit school, so he agrees with Vinny about that. Julie asks how much he's supposed to do for those kids. He's their brother, their father, their friend, their teacher. He's Arnold Horshack's mother. She's not really exaggerating. He really does fill all those roles, including trying to feed Arnold. Ironically, we will meet Arnold's mother eventually. Gabe calls Julie a yetz, which is Yiddish for a stupid or socially inept person, and they yell about yelling. Then he yells out the window that he married a yetz from from Nebraska, which I think is the first time that we learn where Julie is from, and we will definitely hear more about that. She opens the other window and yells that she married a Jewish prince who still sends his laundry to his mother. Less loudly, Gabe yells that he happens to like the way his mother does his shirts. They don't go into this much, but there is a thing here of how they have an interfaith relationship, and they come from very different backgrounds. I still think that they probably met in college. Julie tells Gabe that he can't joke away this problem, so she's treating the thing about the shirts as a joke. A Jewish prince is basically what it sounds like here, that it's a Jewish man who is spoiled by his mother, and we've had hints in the past that Gabe has a difficult relationship with his mother. Sometimes she's very strict, but I could also buy that she spoils him a little bit. And we did have a thing in an early episode where Julie asked why Gabe's mother doesn't like Julie. As far as I recall, we don't actually meet Gabe's mother, but we definitely meet his father. Julie says she thought she was married to somebody named Gabe. He's become somebody named Mr. Kotter, and we know that they were married 2.5 or 3 years before he becomes a teacher. So I could kind of see why that was an adjustment, and it's just sinking in. And as for the thing of it not bothering her as much before, I think part of it is that maybe the boundaries have been pushed more as time has gone on. Someone knocks, and Gabe opens the door to Vinny, who's wearing the green jacket that Julie threw out the window. Vinny is very happy because a kid downstairs sold it to him for $1. And somehow this happened just between the time that Julie threw the jacket out the window, that a kid found it and sold it to Vinny, and then Vinny came upstairs. Julie tells Barbarino to go away and find himself a woman. So I thought that was interesting because Barbarino doesn't have any problem finding girlfriends. Maybe she's implying that he would better understand that Mr. Kotter is in a serious relationship if he had one himself. But it was just an odd remark for her to make. Gabe tells her to calm down and not yell, but Vinny says the yelling makes him feel right at home, and we know that his parents like to yell at him and possibly each other. Vinny sits down on the couch, but he has to move the flowers out of the way. Julie tells Gabe to make a choice, her or Vinny, and that is what these 2 episodes are about, in essence. Gabe says it's her, and he kisses both her hands. But then he asks if they can't let Vinny stay for a couple days, so he just is pushing it. Julie stalks away to the bathroom, closing the door behind her. Vinny stands and suggests he make himself scarce while these 2 lovebirds have this out. Gabe nods. Vinny's word of advice is, in stormy times like this, it helps if you tell her she was the first. And then he exits, implying that Vinny has pretended to have lost his virginity with various girls, and that is what he is recommending that Gabe do with Julie, although Gabe presumably was older when he met Julie. Gabe goes over to the bathroom door. He yells at her to come out, but when she doesn't respond, he says she was the first, so he's going to try anything. He yells, "Julie, I love you!" But she hits him in the face with the door when she comes out with her arms full of probably shampoo and stuff. It's hard to tell what it is. She packs the stuff from the bathroom wordlessly as Gabe offers to give Vinny money to go to a motel, which is what he should have done in the first place, if he's going to get that involved. Gabe yells at Julie that he's at his breaking point and she should unpack that bag because he wants to talk to her. She wordlessly glares at him. He starts to tell a joke about his aunt, but she doesn't want to hear it. She's going to a hotel. She'll pick up her stuff when he's at school, which is all the time. So I think that's why she went down to the school with a picnic basket, because she felt like, well, she's not getting a chance to talk to him at home. As she grabs her coat, he explains that the joke has to do with moving. His aunt met the new neighbors and told Uncle Herb that the guy next door makes love to his wife all day long. Why doesn't Herb do that? Julie says, "Goodbye, Mr. Kotter." Gabe calls after her, and then he finishes the joke out loud to himself. Uncle Herb said, "I can't. I hardly know that woman." Gabe closes the door and takes off his jacket as there's a snippet of the theme song and applause. We don't get a tag. That is the joke at the end, and of course it is very different because Julie is not there to react to it, and as usual it's a joke about an unhappily married couple, so Gabe's timing and sensitivity are not what they should be. We get Gabe Kaplan's voiceover saying, "Here are some scenes from part 2 of our story, which will continue on the next Welcome Back, Kotter." I was thinking about this. In the early seasons of Good Times, it's around 74, 75, shortly before this, the next time was done very awkwardly. Like they had kind of forgotten how to do this. Now, if you watch 60s sitcoms, they don't do multi-parts as much, but I do remember like on That Girl, it was pretty smooth and they would have fun with it. And it was sort of like in the mid-70s, maybe because now they were back to doing live TV rather than filmed without an audience. They weren't sure how to explain that that there were multi-part episodes. And so I'm explaining awkwardly how this was very awkward. And this is slightly better. Now, what they would usually say is next week, but they were going to air part 2 2 days later because of that jump from Tuesday to Thursday. And Welcome Back, Kotter would stay on Thursdays through the end of season 3. And then things got wonky in season 4. But that is the night that I most associate Welcome Back, Kotter with, not Tuesdays, because Tuesdays was Happy Days followed by Laverne and Shirley. And Laverne and Shirley premiered in January of 1976. So that is why that bump came a year later. Three's Company joined that lineup and it became a blockbuster night. But I also had a fondness for Thursday nights, which eventually would include Mork and Mindy, as I discussed on that podcast. We get these scenes from part 2 of our story, and I won't comment on them too much now because I want to talk about them in context. But we get Freddie ordering the Sweathogs into the room. We have Gabe on the phone talking to Julie, who went to see Gabe's cousin Bernie, the lawyer. Then we see Freddie in the classroom putting on square dance music to his classmates' disgust and disbelief. We have Arnold calling Freddie a real schmendrick, so I'll talk about that Yiddish later. We have Woodman confessing he misses Barbarino, and Kotter telling the students that they have caused friction between him and his wife, so there will be no more jokes and impressions in this classroom. Overall, we can see that there's continued strife and stress in the next episode, and that Freddie is not working out as a leader, and Julie presumably wants a divorce if she's going to see a lawyer, and there is this friction between her and Gabe. As I mentioned on the previous pod, they would do quite a few multi-part episodes, not just 2-parters, but 3-parters and even 4-parters, and it just became a thing on Welcome Back, Kotter. So this is the first time around, and it's a really strong first part. I give each of these episodes a letter grade like in a classroom, so F- to A+, and this is a B+. It's one of the strongest episodes of season 1. It is funny and thought-provoking, and there is some drama, although some of that is presented humorously, and there are some character insights. I also choose a head of the class, which is the character, not necessarily a student, whose performance I most enjoyed or was most interested in, and I'm going to go with a tie again, and this time it's Julie and Vinny, because they are the ones going through a lot. Her conflict is presented more seriously, although not always taken seriously by her husband, and we'll find out more about why she feels this way in part 2, but she feels like her life is kind of empty, and we saw that a little bit in the Longest Weekend episode, where she felt like the neighbor Candy Lieberman had a more glamorous and interesting life as a divorcee, and Julie just is spending her days with meatloaf and tuna casserole. She has been living through Gabe since he became a teacher, and that is not satisfying to her. And it's not just that he is teaching, but that he has opened up his home to the Sweathogs and they are losing their privacy. And so she has had enough. She's fed up. As the IMDb synopsis said, finally drives away the neglected Julie. And then Vinny, meanwhile, is having his identity crisis because he is no longer the leader. He also has lost his home because his father does not approve of him being a dropout, so not at all supportive of what Vinny is going through. Kotter is the brother and father figure for these kids. Although Vinny says Kotter was his last resort, I think probably Kotter is the first one he went to. Gabe is caught in the middle, and he's trying to balance these different demands on him and not doing very well, not giving very good advice, using humor as a defense mechanism, and not having serious discussions with Julie because for whatever reason he just can't sit and talk seriously. We've seen him talk seriously in some episodes, but I think that this is just too much, and he is scared probably, and so he makes the situation worse by telling jokes. And then he decided to teach the kids a lesson about democracy, and that backfired. There could have been a way to do it. In a sense, they already had their lesson with democracy when Vinny ran for class president, but he made it more personal by having a classroom leader. We've already seen that the Sweathogs will kick each other when they're bear down sometimes, as when Juan lost the fight with Todd Ludlow, when Vinny was possibly dating Judy Borden. This is not going well, and it cannot all be resolved in one episode, so I appreciate that the Ranos gave this story room to breathe. There definitely are two-part episodes on various sitcoms that don't need almost an hour. They really could get by with half an hour, but there's no really thing I would leave out here. I think it's all really well done. There's some nice ensemble work, and I just want to mention that this is the 9th episode with Vernagine, and again, she doesn't have a lot to do, but she definitely supports Freddie. The credits mention somebody named Larry Noshel as Kibitzer. I don't know if that's like when people are playing poker and there's a Kibitzer, or that's his last name. This is a very odd credit, but I do want to single out one of the extras because I felt that the Not Gutenberg guy was doing his damnedest to steal scenes as a background player. And we've seen the redhead and some other people like Ricky do a lot, but I just felt like he was definitely trying to make the episode about himself, but I enjoyed it. I felt like it was totally justified. In a sense, maybe he, rather than Juan, was the deciding vote to shift the balance of power. There may be a whole subtext to this episode. We'll see if he is featured as much in the next episode. The title, Follow the Leader, obviously has to do with the leader of the classroom, but maybe it's also about the balance of power in Julie and Gabe's relationship and whether there really needs to be power, and we'll get some more of that in part 2. In the meantime, remember that in this great land of ours, we pick our leaders through the democratic process, except for President Ford.
Diabetes in my life.